World of Gimmicks. Yes, that is exactly what we are steering into right now. My name is RagingRaptor, your residential Swiss dinosaur here, and in today's video we are going to talk about what this could mean in the terms for World of Tanks, where it came from, and why it kind of annoys me that we get the Yoh Tanks before anything else. The World of Gimmick or Box of Gimmick term originally came from World of Warships. And you know why? Because the World of Warships developers decided to go all out with basically everything new has to have a gimmick. Otherwise, it will not sell well. That was their mind. And that's kind of sad. Because back in the days, all the way back in the days, you had your aircraft carriers, you had your battleships, you had your cruisers, and you had your DDs, your destroyers. The destroyers were the only one having a smoke screen, allowing themselves to get concealed and concealing their allies to make it easier for them to shoot without getting spotted. The cruisers were the only one which had radar, so they could counter DDs. So it was a little bit of a rock, paper, scissors, you know? Cruisers counter DDs, DDs counter BBs, BBs counter cruiser, aircraft carrier counter BBs, cruiser countering aircraft carrier. That was basically the rock, paper, scissors type of game we had. Something like Battlefield also has. All well and dandy. But oh wait, let's open the box of gimmicks. Because suddenly they started to introduce radar to a battleship, effectively all destroying one of their weaknesses, being DDs with their torpedoes. Then they introduced cruisers with smoke screens, which they can set themselves, being rather obnoxious. That was the British cruisers. Then they started to introduce cruisers which were able to use smoke screen while also driving at full speed, which was never heard of before. Then they decided to introduce torpedoes which do not work on DDs, but only on battleships and on aircraft carriers. Wow! And then. Literally, you can look right now in the tech tree and you can see that basically every single tech tree in World of Warships has to have some unique feature. And that just gets plain stupid and plain boring. We have a consumable allowing half the reload time, double the DPM for no reason whatsoever. We have speed boost, we have whatever the hell you can imagine, basically. Battleships with aircrafts. Not spotter aircrafts, not fighter aircrafts, actual torpedo bombers or bomb droppers. It gets ridiculous. And the sad part is, why I'm bringing this up, that's exactly where World of Tanks at the moment is starting to veer into. Yes, I don't think the Stridswagen are gimmicky. They are unique in a sense because it's a mechanic they actually had IRL. That was their main thing. STB1, same shit. They had this active suspension system. Sometimes I would like to be able to use it myself, you know, just always put it at frontal work like you can do in War Thunder. The same thing with the KPC 70 over there, which could also come to World of Tanks. But suddenly we had the Rinoceronte, a line which wasn't really that good, but it had this auto reloader mechanic, which we already knew from the Italian tanks, which was their gimmick. But it had to be more interesting. So if you shoot and you're not fully reloaded, you get some reload refunded. So that is the new gimmick. Then we had the VZ55 or the new Czech Heavy line. Well, their gimmick is they are able to choose between two guns, with one being superior because it has amazing burst. Yes, the Czech medium tanks already had gimmicks, but suddenly we have the two-shot autoloader, which is a lot better and the choice. And now comes the Yoh Tanks. Once again, a first proper, truly interesting and unique gimmick, meaning you are not able to detract them frontally, or at least how you usually peek, because they have those emergency tracks in the back. I do want to point out that those emergency tracks, they were actually a thing, and that is actually fairly interesting. The Yoh Tanks are actually more grounded in reality than the VZ55, the 60TP and the Type 5 Heavy combined, because the 60P, Type 5 Heavy and the VZ55 are either pure manufacturations of ideas by Wargaming, or they were just some loose sketches on paper. That's it. The Yoh company actually did put quite some research into the idea of those tanks, with some tanks even having their whole engine in the turret, allowing them to have slimmer hulls, even though me as a crew member would be kind of scared to have an engine in the back of the turret. And yes, one of their main ideas of those Yoh Tanks was to have very narrow turrets with autoloaders in them, or a specific loader lift thing, as well as the emergency track, which did allow them it's a rubberized track at the back, which allowed them to still be capable of moving after driving over a mine or something, to give them emergency mobility if it's necessary, which is a fairly interesting idea. And wooden mock-ups did exist, so they are more grounded than other tanks. But the thing is, and this really grinds my gears about those tanks, while those are concepts which existed, concepts which have been built as wooden mock-ups, that's about it. And can you now imagine what a punch in the gut this has to be to get a gimmicky tank added to the game, and for the sake of gimmicks, for the sake of ooh, shiny new thing, then an actual new tree with unique tanks, which might not have a gimmick, a whole new tree with, in theory, tank destroyers, heavy tanks, medium tanks, light tanks, and even RD. You are listening to my description of the Swiss tech tree made by Mitsutai. I already discussed it once way back. And the thing is, yes, there are conceptual tanks, especially for the heavy tank division. There are conceptual tanks in there. Light tanks are also fairly conceptual, and there are some copy-paste tanks in theory, because Switzerland did use some certain tanks. However, there is enough information out there, especially in the tech tree proposal by Mitsutai, to build an almost, at least at higher tiers, almost unique Swiss tech tree. Typhoon tank destroyer, basically a Stritzwagen on steroids, because it doesn't have this mechanic, but it's a lot quicker. It's basically like a Kanonjagdpanzer 1 of 5 on tier 10. Then we would even have something like the Piranha RS, which is basically a wheeled light tank with a 75mm gun rather than a 105mm gun. Might be a little bit controversial, but could be interesting. Then obviously the Panzer 68, an L7 or a 105mm gun equipped Panzer 58. Probably know where this is going. Probably has its 390 Alpha. Or, you know what? Wargaming could make it interesting, just give it 360 Alpha and make it a second option to the Leopard for people which don't want to have the high Alpha but lower rate of fire, but want to have lower Alpha for high rate of fire, but don't want to go too low like the K91. Could be a gimmick or a uniqueness to those tanks. And then apparently the heavy tanks the Swiss tech tree had, or would have, actually had active suspension. So they would be in line something like the STB1 in that regard, or the UDIS for Alt 14 or 1516. You know, yes, the heavy tanks would be paper projects, like the Yoh Company tanks. But the tank destroyer, light tank, RDs, and the medium tanks wouldn't be, at least in tier 10, depending what Wargaming is doing. And this is just a punch in the gut if you know that our country were able to build a whole tree for World of Tanks or War Thunder, if you also want to include that game, and we don't get it. Other example, we already discussed that, would be Romania. We already looked at their GDs, and I still should do the video about the medium and the heavy tanks. And the thing is, those medium-heavy tank tech tree have inspiration of the Russian tank building doctrine. Small, angled, rounded, that's it, 100mm guns. But the thing is, they're basically like T-54s, but chunkier. They have more armor, they have the same roughly appeal, but they have a lot more armor. Some of those prototypes, I think up to tier 9, please don't quote me on that though, if I remember correctly, up to tier 9 the tanks were built. The same goes for the tank destroyer line, while the tier 10s are concepts, which is something we right now just have in World of Tanks at this point. But yeah, in the end, those Yoh Tanks are just a punch in the gut to all the other proper tank ideas and tank concepts which have been made by users. And it's simply sad. It's genuinely sad to know that this is a thing, that this has been done, that this is what Wargaming wants to go next. And it kind of asks ourselves, what will be the next gimmick? Suddenly a tank which can actively use smoke screens, you know? But all the other tanks that have smoke grenade launchers don't count. They don't get that. It's the same with the new emergency track mechanic. Shouldn't the 279 get that as well? It has 4 tracks. Shouldn't the 80 Phase 1 get that as well? Because it has 4 tracks. Who knows? Who knows? And it just feels like it gets a little bit overblown or overloaded. Yes, those tanks already exist in World of Tanks Blitz. They're very overpowered because they have two-shot autoloaders like the VC55, which are funnily enough also overpowered right here. We'll see how the armor will look, but at the moment they're still in super test. But it looks like the general reception, what I've seen from viewers and from commenters on different videos, they really don't like this mechanic because it is basically impossible to detect them if you only see their front, which is understandable. Anyway, my name is RagingRaptor. Thank you so much for listening to my rant about this topic, which is getting more and more pronounced every single day. I see you around in the next video and I hope you have a great day. Cheers!